Everyone, today's mini lesson is focusing on democratic values. This is the first mini lesson, which is transitioning from looking at government in general to specifically focusing on government within the United States. Today's lesson is based around three learning targets. The first states, I can identify and analyze democratic values in the Declaration of Independence. That portion of the lesson, we're going to define and look at examples that the Founding Fathers stated in the democratic values, including justice, unalienable rights, and equality. The second learning target is I can use examples to investigate why people agree on democratic values in the abstract, yet disagree on application. In that portion of the mini lesson, we're going to look at how these democratic values can kind of contradict one another in specific situations and have led to various debates throughout the United States. And the third one is I can explain and evaluate how people seek to bring the U.S. closer to democratic values. So this is talking about different things that people within a democratic society can do to try and help and improve the overall society to reaching closer to a democracy. So these are even things that you could get involved in. So, first of all, we're going to look at democratic values in the Declaration of Independence. Before we do so, though, I want to provide you with just a little bit of a refresher on the Declaration of Independence. So, the Declaration of Independence was initially drafted in 1775. However, it was not signed until 1776 by the colonists. The Declaration of Independence was initially drafted by a committee of 5 individuals, including Thomas Jefferson, who was the primary writer, and Benjamin Franklin. The other three are names that you would not recognize. But anyway, they got together and initially they were discussing the conditions of the 13 colonies under Great Britain. They were very frustrated by how things were being run and, in a lot of ways, blamed King George III for everything, even though a lot of the concerns they were expressing were ultimately the responsibility of Congress. When they got together, they started drafting a declaration, which is broken down into 4 parts. The first part is talking about why they initially drafted the Declaration of Independence. So it's talking about how they were not happy with how the government was being run, and so they felt it necessary to state why that was. The second portion is the preamble, which is one of the most famous quotes that starts with "We the people." We'll talk more about that in a moment. And the third part was the longest portion, which was a list of 27 grievances or complaints they had against King George III. And the last part was the signatures, which represented the union of colonists from different colonies coming together and saying that we certified this document. Now, timing wise, the first battle of the Revolutionary War breaks out in 1775 at Lexington and Concord. So the war had been fought for roughly a year prior to the Declaration of Independence being created. Initially, when the Declaration of Independence was created, it was not only sent to King George III, but it was also published in newspapers within the colonies to gain support for the Revolutionary War, as well as published on the world scale to gain support from other countries, whether that be sending soldiers or sending supplies or sending money or whatever the case may be. So, the Declaration of Independence is not a legal document. It is not a law. It is not a treaty. It is just a letter that was sent to Great Britain to express concerns with how the country was being run and express that the colonists no longer had interest in being part of Great Britain. Consequently, within this document, for the first time, we see colonists expressing what they want a government to be, what they want a government to aim for. And a lot of these aims are based around the democratic values. In this mini lesson, we're going to focus on 3 of them, although there are more, because these are the 3 that were first introduced in the Declaration of Independence. The first one is talking about justice. So, justice is referencing all individuals being entitled to a fair and impartial legal system. Consequently, they are not subject to arbitrary or unjust actions. In other words, this is a system that is formally followed. The government can't make up rules as they go. They have to give them the right to a jury. They have certain rights, and it's all spelled out in legal proceedings. This stemmed from the Declaration of Independence accusing King George III of, quote, obstructing the administration of justice and, quote, depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury. So there were a lot of accusations happening at this time that Great Britain was not allowing the colonists that were accused of doing something the right to trial by jury, or if they were taking them back to Great Britain, and it took a long time. And then the jury were made up of people from Great Britain, and so they had a bias towards the government versus the colonists, and there were a lot of accusations being put in place. And consequently, the Declaration of Independence comes out and says there needs to be legal proceedings, basically, in order to ensure that justice is achieved. The second one is unalienable rights. We talked about this first within the first mini lesson of the government curriculum when we were talking about some of the initial philosophers. So, the idea of unalienable rights were initially introduced by John Locke. He stated that all people, no matter where they live, should have natural rights. Those natural rights should include the rights to life, liberty, and property. When Thomas Jefferson drafts the Declaration of Independence, he adjusts this slightly to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is largely rooted in fundamental freedoms and largely comes from the founding fathers criticizing King George III for violating these rights. These are especially emphasized in the preamble, which is the most quoted portion of the Declaration of Independence, when the colonists stated, "We hold these truths to be self evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights." And it specifically states that those unalienable rights could and should include life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The third democratic value is kind of related to justice, it's kind of related to unalienable rights, and that is equality. In terms of the Declaration of Independence, equality is referencing that all individuals are created equal. It condemns Great Britain for creating laws and systems which created inequality. So it is especially emphasizing taxation without representation, saying that people that lived in the colonies did not have an equal say in the laws that they were creating. It was talking about how their governors that were elected within the colonies really didn't have a say in anything, didn't have a lot of power. This most famously is introduced with the quote, "All men are created equal," which again is out of that preamble that I just read. And they wanted to emphasize no discrimination based on social status, wealth, or origin. However, of course, knowing history, this was not true. There was still slavery existing in the United States until the Civil War. So, even after the Treaty of Paris is signed, formally creating the United States in 1783, the institution of slavery exists within the United States until 1865. So, this is again one of those debates that are had that, yes, this was something that the founding fathers really believed in. However, the reality was people were not all equal. There were different conditions put in place for people who were enslaved. There were different things put in place for people who were immigrants, for women. There were a lot of different groups that were limited in their rights in a lot of different ways. So now we're going to talk about some of the contradictions. So while these in theory sound great and they're all values that are important parts of any democracy or democratic system, there are times that specific situations come into play that they contradict one another, and you can't have both. Two of the common contradictions are liberty and authority or order. So, by definition, liberty is talking about freedoms to act or think as individuals within the law. And most law systems, including that in the Constitution, state that these shouldn't be oppressed, so that people should have the freedom to liberty. That sounds great that people have freedom and individual rights. This was something that was a major concern of the founding fathers, a big part of the Bill of Rights, a big part of the Constitution. However, over time, there has been a question if the government should have the right to limit liberty at the sake of safety of others. So there becomes this balance between wanting order within a society and allowing people freedoms. And sometimes those freedoms being limited is providing safety and security for the entire society. And sometimes by creating that safety for an entire society, people have to give up freedoms along the way. And there have been a lot of debates throughout history as to where to draw that line. The next debate is between justice and equality. So, justice, by definition, is to treat individuals fair or impartial. We just talked about this. Equal opportunity is talking about providing individuals with equal opportunities to live. However, there have been a lot of debates on the fairness and equitable distribution within a society, especially when looking at things like access to education and income distribution, as to whether that is a sense of equality or that is a system of justice. So, justice and equality commonly come head to head as well. The third debate is between individual rights and the common good, and this is probably the one that comes up the most, especially in looking at court cases. So, individual rights, by definition, guarantee basic freedoms. So, these within the United States are spelled out in the Bill of Rights, which are the first 10 amendments or changes to the Constitution. This includes freedoms such as freedom of speech, freedom of the press, right to bear arms, right to the accused, protection against search and seizure. There are a lot of rights kind of spelled out in those 10 amendments. Common good is talking about the well being and interests of society as a whole. We talked about the common good within the social contract, within a lot of the philosophers who felt that in a way, people gave up individual liberties and individual rights in order to ensure that the society is safe and there's order and that the society can last long term. Consequently, there have been debates about things like freedom of speech versus public safety. So, for example, if someone runs into a theater and yells fire, that has been kind of the textbook definition of this debate between individual rights and the common good. Yes, people have individual rights to freedom of speech. However, that is prohibiting common good because that is a safety concern that could cause chaos, that could cause people to get injured, especially if that person for sure knows that there is not a fire and are intentionally doing that to do harm or chaos to society as a whole. Another debate that has come up with this division between individual rights and the common good more recently is this idea of hate speech. So, there have been laws put in place that outline basically what cannot be said or should not be said to individuals who belong to specific groups, whether that be specific races or sexual orientations or whatever the case may be. So, those hate speech laws, there's been debates at various levels of government whether those can exist, what they should include, what the punishment should be if those are rights that are included under freedom of speech. Should that extend to talking about social media? That has really come up in a lot of court cases as well as legal debates recently. So, now we're going to talk a little bit about this pursuit of democratic values. So, if a society like the United States aims to have a democratic society, basically, how do we get there? And there are 5 specific categories we're going to look at. The first one is looking at active civic engagement, and that really comes down to voting. So, once you're 18 within the United States, you have the legal right to vote. That right to vote allows you to vote for a president every 4 years. It allows you to elect a governor within the state of Michigan every 4 years. It allows you to vote for state and federal members of the House of Representatives every 4 years, and then of the federal Senate every 6 years, as well as vote on more local issues as well. So, that is probably the biggest part of any democratic society, is making sure that people are voicing their opinion as to who should be elected, and consequently, they are going through the voting process. The second one is looking at advocacy and activism. So these are people coming together to stand up for specific rights or fight for the extension of rights. This can be public demonstrations such as marches or peaceful protests. They can write letters to their representatives if they want a specific law changed or introduced. Grassroots movements, which are basically talking about starting programs small and growing them up. That's what grassroots by definition means. The next one is protecting civil liberties. So, this includes having a system in place in order to protect things like freedom of speech, the right to assemble, equal treatment under the law. There are different systems put in place to promote diversity and inclusion, and that can be of various groups at different times in different situations. And then finally, education and awareness. And this is really coming down to education. So, the biggest example of this is within most of the 50 states. Like yourself, students are required to take a government related class, talk about the importance of voting, and talk about basically what rights they have within the Bill of Rights, what the government system that they have to follow every day is like, and what it's structured like, and what their responsibilities are. So, overall, democratic values are a key concept within the American government. They're concepts that we will continue to talk about within the government curriculum as we explore various primary documents within different times in history. However, they were most influenced by the Declaration of Independence, which was the first time that individuals of the future United States came together and basically talked about what they wanted their government to become. Over time, these have been debated in terms of coming head to head with one another as to which one should prevail in terms of safety and things like that. And there have been various systems put in place in order to ensure that democratic values persist, especially those based around voting and education.